All right, brilliant. Okay, well, I'm going to kick things off. So, hello, welcome. It's really wonderful to have so many of you here live with us today, but also hello to those of you who are watching this on record. Um, those of you who have attended other sessions in this series will know that it's been all about recruitment. Today, we're talking about onboarding, which might seem a bit left field, but we'll come back to that in a moment about why onboarding is such a critical part of your recruitment process. Just for the moment, let me start with some introduction. So I'm Bea. I'm one of the co-founders of the Pioneers. I have spent much of the last 8 months looking after my son, who arrived last May. So I am very excited about today because I have been released from baby duties. I apologise in advance if I talk too fast and get overexcited. It's because my brain has not been this stimulated in a little while. Those of you that know us at the Pioneers will know that we exist to make the world of work better. And we believe that to do that, leaders need to think systemically about how they build out their people processes. I think onboarding is a really perfect example of why you need to think systemically, because it's one of those parts of the people process that I think can fall through the gaps. It doesn't sort of belong in a particular silo, and it can get missed if you're not thinking about the whole system that you're trying to create a people experience for your people. So to help me dig into this topic, I have the wonderful Chris Jones from Onboarder. And Chris, could you just give us a little introduction to yourself, please?
Of course. Thanks, Bea. So, hi everyone. As Bea mentioned, I'm Chris, and I head up the customer success team in EMEA at Onboarder. So, I've been working with Onboarder for about 5 years now, and I guess as part of that, what I've been able to do is work with hundreds of pretty amazing companies across both the EMEA region and also through APAC to help them think differently about the way that they run their people programs, from everything from onboarding, as we're going to talk about today, offboarding, parental leave, any transition in an employee's life, really helping them to think about how they can get the most from those programs. So a little bit about Onboarder. Onboarder is the world's first people activation platform. So that really means empowering companies to, as I mentioned, get the most from those different experiences and those transitions for those employees. So I think the key thing is, in this age of overwhelm that we're living in, even more so now, I think, it's thinking about how you can take your people programs and make them more human-centric and deliver them in bite-sized chunks at the right time to the right audience. So I'm very lucky to be here today and hopefully share some insights. And I guess I've known the Pioneers and Bea for the last few years. We've kind of spoken a lot of times, but it's been a while.
I even came and sort of squatted in your office for a little while. So
That's right. And we were very lucky to have you for the short time that was.
cool, brilliant. Well, Chris, I feel we're in very good hands with you and able to share your insights. So maybe a good place to start this conversation is just to start with, if you could give us an idea of, when you're talking about onboarding at Onboarder, what do you mean? What is onboarding? Because I think some people could think that it's just that first day in the office. For others, it might have quite a different meaning. So what do you think about as onboarding?
Yeah, I think it's great to define it. So for me, it's really any time after someone started engaging with your company through the recruitment process, they've technically started their onboarding because they're really getting to know you as an organization through that recruitment process. I guess the official onboarding start for me would be once someone has accepted their offer through till 3 or 6 months after they've been with the organization and they've been able to settle in and learn the ropes a little bit. So it could be a 3 months before they start through to 6 months after, or it could even be a full year after. There's a lot of different things you could look at, but yeah, it's definitely not just that day one, and it's not just after they've joined. There's a lot of work that needs to be put in before they've actually joined the organization.
Yeah, which I think we'll get on to. So it's safe to say it's a big topic.
Just a little one.
Yeah, and I was thinking about with that, it's a big topic. it's also, I think, a big moment in people's lives. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about why does onboarding matter? And I think the place that, to me, it makes sense to start is when you think about it from the employee's perspective or a candidate's perspective. Joining a new company, changing jobs, it's a major transition in your life. And I think it's quite easy as a company sometimes to think especially if you're going through rapid growth, you're actually onboarding people all the time. It's maybe routine or business as usual. But for any individual, that's a big change. And we've mentioned before, actually, in this series, Chip and Dan Heath's work on the power of moments. And I think when we think about onboarding from the employee perspective, it's a major transition moment in their life. So it will be memorable, good or bad, kind of regardless of what a company does. And it's worth just recognizing that you're kind of the guardian of somebody going through that life transition. Maybe you spend a lot of time talking to companies about onboarding. Do you think companies generally recognize it as a transition? And how have you seen people help to make it maybe a good, memorable transition rather than a poorer one?
Yeah, it's funny. I think there are some people, some organizations who are very, very advanced with this, and others who aren't. And it's not necessarily just because they're a big company that they know what they're doing. I think historically it's been around paperwork, it's getting your contracts and all that type of thing. So rather than a transition, it's been more of a formal process. What I'm lucky to have is working with these companies who are more forward thinking, and they do see this as a transition period. And it's really thinking about what that person is going through, leaving their current employer or whatever they were doing before joining, and really trying to make them feel reassured and feel comfortable that what they've just signed up for is actually going to be a great thing for them to do. So what we see companies do well is, and we'll talk about this more as well, but that pre-boarding phase, I think, is a really important one. It's thinking also about personalization, making sure that they feel like they're valued. They're not just another number joining the company. But then it's also connecting with other people in the organization. So making sure that they know who the manager is, making sure that the manager's there on the first day. All those things just to make them feel like they have made the right decision as they're going through. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think it's not, I think there's a recognizing that this is a transition for that individual. So how do you capitalize on that? There's also just it seems really obvious, but it's a first impression that you're making. So if you think about it from the company's perspective, so not talked about that it's a transition for the individual, but from the company's perspective, it's also your chance to make a good first impression. From a psychological perspective, we talk about the halo effect. So that first impression casts a halo over all future experiences that employee has with you. So they will start to, or they will anticipate future things reflecting those first experiences. So if you do something great at the beginning, actually you can buy yourself quite a lot of forgiveness as a company over time, because people are looking to reinforce the first impressions they've already made. So again, I think that's another reason why onboarding really, really matters. And I just wondered, are there any examples that you've got where companies have created a really good halo effect, like they've done something that's created that wow moment or a fantastic first impression? I know we'll come on to talk about some of the maybe more basic things that you must get right, but those wow moments.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, because if you give a bad experience, then people are just probably going to pick up on everything. Like, oh, I didn't get this, I didn't get that. Whereas if you can, maybe an example, having an access card or having the laptop and kit already on day one, then they might just not think about okay, there's one system they haven't been able to access. That's fine because I got everything else. But also, I think a really good way is to mention the personalization concept. There's this really big concept about kind of the 3 p.m. snack, and what's the favorite thing that you pick up at 3 p.m. or approaching 3 p.m. now. So, asking a question to that new employee and maybe giving them a little welcome pack, which is customized to what they've responded to. It's incredible how, a chocolate bar or I don't know, something that they've mentioned can just change their whole perception of their onboarding, and it gets shared on LinkedIn and it goes everywhere. So I think that is a really great example of how you can create that halo effect. Not a huge, outlay of expenditure, but you're able to maybe change the whole way they think about the rest of the journey.
Yeah, it's a little moment of thought, isn't it, about
Yeah.
that individual that really makes a difference.
Yeah.
Again, another thing that prompts for me, there's kind of the really nice to haves and the things that you can do on the first day that I think are really critical in that halo effect. Another area I just want to cover in terms of why onboarding matters is this speed to effectiveness. I think, again, we've talked a little bit about seeing things from an employee perspective, and actually this remains true from an employee perspective and a company perspective. But if you've now got your new hire in the door, it makes sense as a company, you want to get them to a point where they can contribute as fast as possible to the success of your business. And actually, from their own perspective, nobody wants to be sitting in a job feeling like they're twiddling their thumbs or no good at it for a long period of time. So the employees also want to be quickly able to feel valuable. Again, have you got examples or experience of how companies have supported that speed to effectiveness and made that as good as possible?
I think there's two big things I'd say. One is having some kind of onboarding plan is crucial, and I think it's going to be different for every new joiner. And that's where it's crucial to get the manager involved and really try and coach and guide them to know like what is a good first couple of weeks and how can you actually help your new joiner settle in. They know what they're doing. They've got calls locked in with different stakeholders to talk to. So I think it's having a plan so that the person knows what they're going to be doing. But then it's also about, I'm a big believer in drip feeding content, bite-sized learning. So rather than dropping everything on day one, here is everything from your health and safety briefing, your compliance, but also here's the portals and here's how you log leave. And here's, that's a lot to take in on day one. So thinking about trying to drip feed that so you're giving them the right content when they might need it. So for example, putting your expenses through, maybe that's not a day one thing they need to know. Maybe that's a week 2 thing they need to know. So if you can think about drip feeding that content, they're going to get it at the right time, but also having a plan of attack so that they know overall what to expect over the first few weeks. That just helps them feel more settled. They don't feel overwhelmed, but they're also working towards getting ramped up from their side.
What do you think about things like sort of sharing the company strategy and stuff? So I think some of those are really practical things that employees need to know in order to function. I think I was thinking about this in the context of recruitment. Line manager or hiring manager and the talent team as well might have been doing this. Will be sort of sharing the company story and convincing this person to join. And I think for me, it seems quite likely that all of that you've shared during the recruitment process, it can get forgotten because if somebody's applying for a job, right, they're trying to impress, they're sort of quite concerned about how they come across, that they're probably not soaking in all the information that's being shared with them.
Yeah.
How should that be, or how can that be effectively replayed during the onboarding process, and not just assume that, oh, we did that all during recruitment, so we don't need to do it again?
I think you're right, because even working with some companies, we'll be helping them map their onboarding journeys, and they say, oh, we've already shared a lot of that in recruitment. And my answer is always like, well, if they see it a second time, will it actually be that harmful? And it might actually just cement what they knew, or it might just reintroduce something they completely forgot about. So I think it is really important to bring those things back in. And another example of that is, employee resource groups or other things that might have been mentioned somewhere in, in the recruitment process about one of the perks of working at your company. But perhaps you might just say, hey, we referenced them in the interview process, but now we want to actually say, which ones are you interested in? And based on that, we can give you some different content, or we can put you in touch with different people. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. It's almost like maybe referencing that it was done in the earlier stages, but just saying, hey, we're going to show you again because we think it's really powerful, and that's a big part of us as a company. So it's worth sharing.
Yeah, definitely. I think you also got to remember that people might have been hearing that sort of information from multiple companies.
Yeah.
And there's a different relationship, I think, that somebody has with that content when they've accepted the job. They're fully signed up and they're about to go on this journey, than when they were sort of applying for the job or trying to convince you to hire them. So I think it's far more likely that it will land in a way that's remembered, and that can be used as well. It should, in theory, shape how that person chooses to go about doing their job and where they focus their time and energy. So
I've definitely heard that before, where people will kind of say, oh, I thought the strategy was X, and then they were clearly referencing another company's strategy. So it's a really good point. They are probably going through multiple processes, right?
Yeah, I think it also it holds you as a company to account as well. I think it's very easy to say things to woo people during a recruitment process, and it and then kind of you've got them in, and you can you feel like you don't need to put your best, or it could be easy to not put your best foot forward, and of course that doesn't serve you well. You should use that material and that narrative again and again. It's a strength for the business. So just one final area, we're still talking about, so why does onboarding really matter? It's a major transition in an employee's life, that when they go to a new job, it matters from a company perspective. You want to try and create this halo effect so that people continue to look for reinforcing good information, good experiences in their journey with the company. It supports increases the speed to effectiveness. And then sort of the last area I just wanted to touch on, which you brought up earlier, Chris, is this networking point. I think there's studies now that show the quicker somebody can get networked in an organization, the more effective they can be. But also it's really important from a diversity and inclusion perspective as well. You help people to feel included. They can find support networks within the business. Have you seen any sort of really effective ways that companies have supported that early networking? I know there's an idea that we really wanted to test with one of our clients, which I might share. But yeah, have you got how do companies support that networking element in the first few days and weeks?
Yeah, I'd love to hear yours as well. So I'll share mine and then I'll hear yours. So I think one of the big ones is the buddy concept, and it's having. I've seen a couple of ways. So some organizations will have, a buddy, and it's one person, and it's generally someone who's in the team of that person who's joining. The role of the buddy is very much around helping them, settle in, introduce to other people. It's not a manager role whatsoever, and it shouldn't be used to delegate tasks from the manager. It should be persons there to help and make them settle in. I've also seen some companies who have two buddies. So they might have a buddy in the team, and then they've got a buddy in another part of the organization who can help them introduce to other people so they can get that sense of connection. And I think that's something that is quite easy to actually create. We've had a lot of companies we've worked with who haven't had it, and then they've started using Onboarder, and then they've kind of brought this program in and had really good feedback. So I think it's a really easy to do thing. I think the other area is thinking around, I mentioned before, the kind of networks and the resource groups. Thinking around who's leading those groups, and who are the people who we can put new people in contact with, making it easy to know what they stand for, how often they meet. So I guess the first thing is having those groups. So if you don't have kind of networking groups, resource groups, really recommend thinking about that, and maybe polling the organization to see what they want and what would actually serve a good purpose. But then once you create them, I think I've seen time and time again, they get created and then people don't really know what they do and how do I actually contact them. And so if you can try and make it really easy to know how I'm going to be part of that network, then that is a great way, I think, to build that camaraderie.
Yeah, I think just listening to some of those ideas as well and thinking about the way in which we're working at the moment in this kind of more remote work, virtual world that we've spent a lot of time in, those making those connections really explicit and making it clear that buddies know what their role is, and that is really important because people have far fewer opportunities to kind of build those in-person relationships just at the minute. And I won't go off on a tangent all about virtual work, but this networking element feels even more important right now.
And I think people who share those similarities really want to, meet each other, right? So I think that's an easy way. If you can have like-minded people coming together, it just builds that network so much more effortlessly.
Yeah, I think the idea that we wanted to test was really about those sort of more extracurricular, I suppose, interests. So could you have a new joiner survey where one of the questions is, what are some of your passions, or what are you really interested in, and that automatically introduces you to other people who've said similar things, so you can find those mutual interests within the organization just actually through quite a simple survey.
Yeah.
And I think some of those things can like having a buddy system, I think, is really important because it makes a very concrete responsibility of somebody to look after the sort of the networking, the network of a new joiner. But you can have maybe some more subtle, serendipitous connections through just giving people access to information about what other people like, and that might help encourage some of that networking as well. So it's not just about projects and the work, it's also about that whole person.
And there's a lot of little applications these days, with Slack plugins and that type of thing, where it can just randomly assign people to have conversations. And there's so much cool stuff out there that you can get for free, and you can just plug it in. And even if it's just meeting someone new you haven't spoken to, you might strike up a little bit of a similarity there as well. So I agree with you. Sometimes those little things might just help if there's not enough time and resource to create a bigger program.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we've established it's pretty important. Onboarding is definitely something that we should care about. I just want to spend a little bit of time, and I touched on this in the introduction about why I think onboarding is one element of the people experience that I think helps us to see why we need to think systematically about people processes. And the question I want to ask is, so whose responsibility is onboarding?
$1 million question.
I will just throw you that question. Whose responsibility is it?
Oh, it's such a complex one. Even thinking about which part of the organization owns it, and it's interesting because obviously in Border we're like a SaaS product, and we sell into companies, and there's no kind of easy thing saying, oh yeah, it's the human resources team or it's the learning team. It really could be such a range, and I think what we've found is it's a shared ownership across different groups. But when we think about kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of it, there are different people who can play different roles. One of the big things that I'm a big fan of, and in Border are as well, is the hiring manager or the line manager playing a really crucial role, because I mean, at the end of the day, they're the person who's going to be working closely with the new joiner. They want them to be successful. They want them to be up and running quickly. So I think a big onus needs to be on the manager, and need to kind of help the manager, I guess, get to a point where they know what they're doing. They have resources and tools that help them get there, and they're able to build a connection with their new joiner. They are able to get them up to speed quickly and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of like at the very base level. But then looking,
sorry to interrupt, Chris.
yeah.
So do you think that in terms of people might have different roles and can take so different roles or different functions within to support the onboarding process, but do you think that ultimate responsibility for delivering the experience should sit with the line manager?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I think it's funny, right? Because you think about the different parts of it, and you've got the admin side, you've got contracts, you've got paperwork. Yes, there need to be teams and systems that help with that. But when it comes to the day-to-day, okay, we're going to work to get you into the business, and we're going to meet goals and objectives and all the rest of it. It really is it's the manager there who's responsible, and then the other teams are there to help them and to upskill them and guide them and coach them. But yeah, I think it really does fall on the manager.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I think I would agree with you. I would agree.
Well, it's crazy how often you hear some managers will say, well, it's not my job. That's HR's job. They're going to do the onboarding, and then I'm going to actually get them upskilled in their job. And you think, well, actually, that's what you're talking about there is onboarding. So it's a really funny, and it comes down to the definition, I guess, of what onboarding is that we mentioned before.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of a conversation we were having internally at the Pioneers last week, I think, which was about there is a lot of boring stuff, for want of a better word, that sits around the compliance elements of onboarding or getting contracts signed. And I think it would be quite easy to say, if you say, oh, it's the line manager's responsibility, and then you kind of give them the checklist of these are the things that you need to do. Do you think that line managers can then sometimes get consumed by the boring stuff or the stuff that's easy to tick off the list and actually forget in my view, the really important parts of onboarding, which are about personalizing the experience and that kind of thing? So there is potentially a bit of a risk of saying, oh, it's all your responsibility, because they then own kind of the wrong parts of it.
I agree. Yeah, I think where I've seen it work best is having onboarding coordinator could be a title I've seen work really well, where someone will kind of take that ownership, and they might sit in the recruitment team, they might sit in the learning team, they might sit in the HR team, but there's someone who kind of takes that ownership, and they will make sure that a lot of that boring stuff, well, firstly, do we need to do all the boring stuff? So it's almost reviewing all that and making sure that, yes, we still need to do these forms and health and safety briefings and all that kind of stuff. So that person can help coordinate and take some of that admin and the heavy lifting, empowering the manager to spend time in getting to know the new joiner, connecting with the right people, making sure there's goals and objectives set. So I agree with you. I think there does need to be some ownership from somewhere in the organization to try and take some of that boring stuff away, because yeah, if you just give checklists to managers, then they say, I have no time to actually connect this new joiner with these people because I'm trying to fill out these tick boxes. So you're right. Then there does need to be help, I think, from the sidelines.
I was just about to prompt, and then as if by magic, I think this leads really nicely into our next question, because we're starting to. So yeah, please, those of you who are watching, there's a poll just popped up. If you could just share what's your biggest challenge when it comes to new hire onboarding. We've put some suggestions forward there, because I think we are starting to get into a bit of that conversation, which is there are difficult, there aren't easy answers to a lot of these. I think there are some quick wins around onboarding, but there's certainly not like an easy answer if this is how to solve onboarding. And I think where we were just getting to with that conversation a bit was this concept of automation. So yes, you might have an onboarding coordinator, but there are, I couldn't talk to somebody who works for an onboarding SaaS platform in this space and not talk about automation in the context of onboarding. So how do you think it can be most effective, that element of automation?
Yeah, I think automation is there to help enhance the human experience. So it's not there to replace it whatsoever, but it's there to maybe, like we mentioned, do things like the paperwork, take some of that out of the way, so there's not manual things being printed off and signed. But it's also thinking about nudges. So it might be saying, for example, with the Onboarder platform, a couple of weeks before the new joiner starts, a message might go to the manager saying, "Hey, don't forget they start soon. Why don't you call them, or why don't you record a video, or whatever it might be." But it's not replacing the manager doing that. It's just trying to help them do a better job. So I think a lot of the automation where it's most helpful is used in conjunction with a person, with a human, and also trying to look at that boring stuff and tick that off with automation, help managers or other people with the human connection. And that's where we get the best, I think.
Yeah, and this again comes back to a conversation we were having internally, which is how do you free up? I think you can use some of this stuff to free up the time of a manager, so that they actually. I think there are two reasons. You're freeing up the time, so that managers just really focus on the human stuff. I also think you're taking away the stuff that can be used as a bit of a crux. So I think, I think managers can sometimes, I've done onboarding because I've ticked off these admin tasks. And actually, if you take those away, you're maybe putting managers, maybe some managers into a position they might feel a little less comfortable, but you're making it really clear what the truly important human stuff is in the onboarding. And this is we've freed up your time to focus on that. So it's sort of both those things for me, I think.
And I think it's a good point that it just made me think. Some of the feedback we've had from companies is managers say that they don't feel in control anymore, if there is this automation helping them. And I think the best thing, if you do automate, it is letting them know what you're automating. So managers have an idea of what the big picture is, what's happening in the background. I think probably most managers won't care that much, but there will always be a certain group who just naturally are more inclined to be on it, and they know what's happening. So I think, to your point there, if we can at least give them context, hey, this is going to be happening over the next few weeks, don't worry, we've got you covered. I think that helps as well.
I think that's a really good point. It would be easy to say, yeah, no, we've done all of that. You just worry about this. Well, it's easy to be transparent, isn't it? When you've got these sorts of systems in place, you can say, yeah, but this is done. This is where you are in the process. I think the other, just sort of come back to that compliance and that boring stuff. I think there's, and whether it's mostly in the pre-boarding phase, that you can kind of keep things ticking over and getting contracts signed and sharing policy documents and that kind of thing. Sorry, I'm just going to shut myself. I think there's a really valuable role for automation in filling in what could be negative experiences in the onboarding process. So again, sorry, I bang on about this book, The Power of Moments. It is a really good book. But transitions are memorable moments for people, but then so are peaks and troughs, and milestones is the other one. And I think there are lots of potential troughs in an onboarding process where the classic is you get the job offer, maybe even sign the contract, and then 3 months go by while you're working out your notice period and you never hear from the company that you're about to join again. And that just is quite an isolating experience. It has the potential to be a real trough, real sort of negative experience before somebody's even started on their first day. And I think some automation can be, I think it's slightly unreasonable to expect a line manager to be in constant communication with somebody who's not even joined their team yet. They do have a job to be getting on with in the here and now, but automation can be used just to keep that relationship alive a bit, and you're not trying to create at this point in time a wow. You're just trying to keep everything level. You're just trying to avoid making a negative impression, which is just as important as making a really positive impression, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And it could be just dropping them information about, like you said before, things they've already had in the recruitment process, dropping that to them, just saying, hey, look, don't forget this is here. Hey, here's more information about your benefits. This is what's going to be happening on your first couple of weeks. Here's a buddy that we've just connected you with. Like those things just keep people engaged. Yeah.
I'm just having a quick look over at our poll. I don't know if it can be made visible to everybody, but it looks like, the most popular or the biggest challenge that people have are enabling the hiring manager to own the onboarding journey. I'm sure that resonates a lot with your experience at Onboarder.
Yeah.
And then the next challenge is about creating a consistent yet personalized experience. So maybe with those two challenges in mind, we'll move on to kind of the meaty bit of the conversation. Not that it's been vacuous so far at all, but so how do we really nail onboarding? That's I think what I just want to spend a bit of time talking about for the rest of the time. And please, if anybody's got any questions that you want to ask, do feel free to jump in. But maybe we can start, Chris, with what would be your number one piece of advice for somebody who's just starting to think about how they could improve onboarding at their company?
Yeah, it's tricky to think of one main one, but
I'll give you loads more, but we'll start with the
I'll
number
start
one.
with one. Reviewing your current process, I think, is really interesting because there's so many things that happen in a recruitment process, particularly these days with so many different systems. So I think it's really interesting to maybe get a group of some new joiners together and just say, hey, what was the experience like for you? So they can give you some input. What were the good things? What were the bad things? What were they like? And even put yourself through the kind of experience. So apply for a job, get the job, then start in the organization and see what emails you get, what's being sent to you, what are you not getting, and then map that out for the rest of the first few months, I guess, of joining the organization. And it's probably terrifying what's either missing or what's being doubled up, or what's just what's going out in general or not going out. So I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice would be just stop, review what you're doing, and get some feedback from people who've gone through it recently.
I think that's really good advice. So I hear do an audit, get feedback. I think it's easy to throw bells and whistles on something that you're not there yet, or actually that's not where you get the most value. So yeah, really sensible place to start. We've got a couple of questions that have come in, so I'll just read those out. So from Ben, I often find that organisations focus on the transactional side of onboarding. Have you got any examples of organisations who have successfully focused on the more strategic and cultural alignment in their onboarding? So is that something? Yeah, have you got an example where it's not been the boring stuff? It's been really business critical.
Yeah, some really good examples of one of my other points around personalization as well. So thinking around, okay, we've got the boring stuff out of the way. Maybe in the first week or two after they've joined, giving the option to allow the new joiner to pick some things they want to learn about. So I've seen some great examples of some companies who've basically said to the employee, hey, we want to give you some great things to view in your first few months, but we also want to kind of personalize that for you. So here are 5 different things that we have deemed important, but which ones would you want to see? And it could be, we want to see what the financial reports were saying in the previous year, or what's happening from a D&I perspective. And based on that, then giving them information which is relevant for them, and maybe directing them through to existing pieces of information that you have already. So I think there's some really great ways where you can think about what your initiatives are as an organization, and then think about how you're going to give this to the new joiners without just kind of pushing everything to them. And what we've seen from that is it increases uptake and engagement, because people are choosing what they want, and then they're going to just naturally have a higher engagement with it. So that's just an example, I think, of what I've seen work really well.
Yeah, I think that also speaks to the point. I think it would be easy to see supporting somebody's alignment to the organization, so getting them strategically and culturally aligned, as was referenced in this question. I think a bit of a bull in a china shop way would be, broadcast to the new joiners. This is about us. This is why we're great. This is everything that you've got access to. But actually, that's a really smart way of helping that individual make their own story meet the organization's story. So it's them finding their way into the information, rather than kind of just being bombarded with your perspective as an organization. So I think that's a really smart way of doing it.
And I guess alongside that, you can still kind of say, hey, look, here's everything if you want to have a look, for those, because I'm sure there are people who want to see everything. So you can give them that option, but you could also allow, here's a bit of choice if you want it. I think that's the key.
Yeah. Cool. Next question. So from the outside, this is from Lee. From the outside, it looks like onboarding specialists are seen to be responsible for ensuring a positive employee experience. From your experience, where do you think a large chunk of the hidden value comes from having someone dedicated full-time to the onboarding process? So what's where's the value in having that dedicated person? Maybe it's a skeptic. Something you learn by doing the job.
Yeah, it's funny from my side. I'm very biased into it because I've seen it work very well. Mm-hmm. I think one of the key things is having someone who kind of manages and centrally keeps it under control really allows for consistency across the organization. So all the different departments have their own different ways of doing things, but by having this kind of onboarding coordinator, it allows for the same company story to be told throughout the organization. And it also allows for a central person to work with the different departments. So if IT is saying, well, we really want to be changing the way we're doing our onboarding, they can work with this person to help change the way that things are happening, or just work to show them what's currently happening, rather than having each department go off and a bit rogue and create their own ways and their own documents and forms. It also, as we mentioned, kind of frees up time for the managers. So if you actually think about that, managers' time is valuable. So if you've got someone who is able to give them some time back, that then benefits the bottom line of the organization, because they're able to invest more into their people and into the projects they're working on. And then the final point, I think, is from the new joiner perspective. It's actually giving them someone who they can kind of reach out to if they've got any queries. It's a face to the onboarding. I think is really important as well. They feel a bit connected with them. So yeah, hopefully there are some good ideas to think about.
Yeah. I think if anybody's contemplating having somebody really owning this, I think there's a couple of things we might come on to in a minute that just from a continuous improvement perspective, I think are also kind of interesting. But before we get there, I just want to take a moment to think about, we've scoped out onboarding as everything from the pre-boarding process before somebody joins through to, say, 6 months where they're fully up to speed and working in their role. How do you see the emphasis changing through that period in terms of the sorts of things that you're supporting somebody with during their onboarding journey? I can imagine how things might shift, more about the welcome and things like that early on, and then perhaps it's more focused on learning later on. But could you maybe share how you see companies changing what they're doing at different parts of the onboarding process? And what do you think seems to work best in terms of the trends that you've seen across companies? And I'm not trying to say there is a single right answer, but what are the sort of trends that you see across that time period and where you might change the focus?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the pre-boarding is really about making sure that they know where to go, they know what to do, they're all set up and prepared, they feel connected with the organization before they've even joined. So a lot of it is, I guess, essentially to try and get them to join. That's a lot of the messaging, is make sure we get them in the door.
And that's a really important point, actually, that we didn't cover at the start, which is there is, particularly in certain industries, a challenge of people literally not showing up to the job.
Yep.
You know, that is a risk. So another reason why it's so important, onboarding.
Yeah, exactly, because it's it's a competitive market, as we all know. So anything we can do to try and get them in the door. So yeah, that pre-boarding window is all for that. And then the first month is very much around, okay, meet the team, make sure that you've got your objectives set with your manager, make sure that you're set up with all the systems. So it's very much around finding your feet, you've got access to everything, you've connected with the team. And then following that, I think what I've seen the most is it really depends on industry and role. So for example, a sales role might then go into much more intensive things around, okay, how are you delivering your pitches? How are you doing your sales processes? So it might even be like a weekly touch point on a specific course or something that they should be referring to or learning from. But I think that time from month 1 to month 6 is very much around learning. So it's thinking about the different maybe processes they have to know, or systems they can be pushed to, or courses or people they can be working with. So I think for each organization, you'd have to do a bit of analysis to see what are the key milestones that you want over the first 6 months. And by drip feeding, as I mentioned earlier, over that time period, people will absorb that more. They won't feel as overwhelmed, and they will just naturally, feel like they're up to speed a bit quicker. So it's check-ins. How's your first week? How's your first month? Have you had your conversations with your manager about your goals and objectives? Probation conversations, that kind of thing might pop in there as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about what's your industry, what are the trends in your industry, what matters to people, and industry is the big category, even just your company. It reminds me of some work we did with a rapidly growing hospitality business, and the challenge, and it's quite typical in the hospitality industry, is around turnover, as in attrition of employees very early on, so within the first 3 months of joining. So you get them in the door, that's okay, because they tend to join quite quickly, but they would leave quite quickly too. And actually, in that context, the focusing on the elements of onboarding that made people feel like they belonged very quickly, that they felt part of the team, they felt included, those sorts of things. So simple things like making sure everybody else in the team knew their name when they started on the first day, making sure that the front door was open and there was somebody there to meet them, rather than them sort of stuck outside a restaurant, going, I'm actually here to work, not eat. I know you're not open yet. Those sorts of awkward things. It seems quite simple to get that right, but they can be easily forgotten. That's the thing that made the biggest difference when we tested it to employee attrition. In a different context, in a different industry, it might be far more important that somebody feels like they're learning really quickly, because that if they're not learning quickly, they're de-skilling in their role, because everybody else there's this kind of constant pressure to be learning and improving your skills. And if you spend 6 months in a new team and you haven't been given an opportunity to keep learning, actually you feel like you're 6 months behind where you were when you started. So yes, thinking about what's going to really matter and motivate people in your industry or in your business, I think is really important. We've just got 10 minutes left, so I'll sort of move on to the final topic of conversation, that sort of two key questions I want to still ask. The first one I'll go to is this idea of how do we keep improving what we're doing in onboarding? We touched on this concept. You might have somebody who is that sort of central coordinator, and I think this could be a valuable role for them. But how have you seen this sort of iterative development work well, and how can you maybe give people some confidence to start playing with making small improvements to onboarding, and what can that look like?
Yeah, it's amazing. People are perfectionists, I think, by nature, and a lot of my role in in Borders generally is basically saying that progress is better than perfection, right? So if you make small little tweaks to your process, it's probably going to make a big difference, and then you can keep on adding over time. So similar to what we said before about reviewing the current process, it's thinking about in that current process, what are the really big pain points? What are the recent new joiners saying? This was really bad. This was not a good experience. And trying to hone in on those things rather than looking at the whole picture and feeling a bit overwhelmed and taking 12 months to kind of do something. So I'd say identify key areas, focus on those first, and then keep on getting feedback. Every time you get new cohorts or new joiners coming in, make sure you're getting feedback, learn from that. Also get feedback from managers, because they're obviously a key stakeholder in the whole process. And over time, you'll just start to chip away at it, put new things in. And we're big believers in keeping agile, iterative approaches. So don't try and do it all in one go, would be the advice.
Yeah, one of the things we spoke about 2 days ago when we were sort of chatting in preparation for this, that I really liked, was this idea that I think there is value in automation. You can also progressively automate.
Yes.
So, maybe start with a checklist for the hiring manager or for the line manager, that they might have to do some manual things to work through that checklist. You can prompt them with that checklist, and then over time, these were your words, not mine, Chris, but you can sort of, rather than it being a checklist, they have to do something, it just becomes a statement that this now has been done for you. So you're still letting them know, getting people comfortable with what the process is, but you're just gradually, as you can, as you have capacity to, as it makes sense in terms of the pressure that maybe people are under in the business. So there's value to be gained now from automating these. Mm-hmm. You can, you're not changing the process, you're just changing who's doing which parts of it.
Yeah. And even from if I go into the weeds of a system perspective, sometimes if you bring a new system into the company, you have to kind of prove the value of it before other people might jump on board. So, perhaps you don't integrate the two systems to begin with, you keep them separate. But then over time you say, hey, look, we're improving this, so why don't we now connect these two systems? So I think it's a great way to build the business case as well from a system perspective, just to say, we'll start small and then we'll kind of build as we go on, and it gets a bit more buy-in, I think.
Fantastic. So the last sort of topic of conversation, question, I wouldn't be a pioneer if I didn't end on this, which is all around personalization. So this was the second most important, second most popular challenge that people identified, which is, how do you create a consistent yet personalized experience? And I think it's a really important question, because it would be very easy, I think, to get focused on the consistency element, like this is the process, this is what we're going to roll out every time, and lose sight of the reason that you're doing any of the automation, the reason that you're trying to create a kind of brand onboarding experience, is so that you can then personalize, because that's what makes the lasting impression on employees. So have you got great examples of how companies have done that really well, and can you maybe share your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I guess from a system perspective, I'm lucky because I work for a company who's all about kind of creating scale and allowing for personalization. But even just some little things that I find quite useful. So, for example, if you're wanting to personalize someone's welcome kit or the swag they get, a really great way I've seen it work is a company might maybe buy 5 different colors of laptop a cover or sleeve, and they might just say, hey, welcome, we can't wait for you to start, what's your favorite color? And then based on that, they receive the sleeve of that color. So to the person, it feels like, wow, this is super personalized. For the organization, it's actually that there were 5 colors, and we've allowed them to kind of pick one of the 5. So I think from a kind of swag perspective, which is obviously only a small part of it, but you can do things to make it feel more personalized when actually you are able to bulk buy things and scale things along the way. And I think the similar way throughout the other parts of the journey as well, where you can give them options, but it's really from a pool of things that you've already created. So you're not making it bespoke to each new joiner, because that's just not effective. Maybe when you're a small organization, but as you grow, it just won't work. So I think it's really the positioning it as there's choice, but it's actually choice from a predefined set of things, I think is a really great, easy win.
Yeah, brilliant. Chris, thank you so much. Do you have any question that you want to raise at this last moment in time? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'd love to, after this, if anyone wants to connect, just to hear of any other things that you might be doing that we haven't mentioned. I'm always open, a bit of an onboarding geek. So anything that you're doing, I think would be fantastic. That's maybe my question to the audience as well.
Okay, brilliant. I will just pop up. So both Chris and I think are like to think of ourselves as helpful people. So I will just pop up on there our contact details. If you are looking at your onboarding processes, if you do want to keep talking about, if these ideas have inspired you, given you a sense of what might work in your organization, or at least given you some things to hopefully start thinking about, both of us, I know, more than happy to continue those conversations and be a bit of a sounding board if that would be helpful. So please do reach out. Chris, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed myself. I think we're oh, there we go, another pop-up. Perfectly finished the time, so I'm pleased with that. And thank you everybody else for joining us. It's been a really good conversation.